Hello, not too many people, but we're happy to have you. Um, Welcome to our wonderful Wildflowers virtual sort of introduction program. Diane Smith is going to be doing our overview today of some of the wonderful wildflowers that are currently blooming on our property and throughout Bucks County. And we should have a really great time on Saturday. If you're not already signed up, definitely sign up for Saturday to come out at 2 o'clock and actually go and hunt for some of them on the property. It should be beautiful. We were out a lot today and there's a lot of great stuff out to look at. So I'm going to turn it over to Diane. Oops, I won't turn it over to Diane just yet. A couple other important things coming up. If you are a member of Bucks Audubon, we are having our annual member meeting next Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock. So definitely join us there. You should have received an email about it. But if not, check out the website and it'll have information on how to get the Zoom link for that. So it should be a great program. We also have our Raptor Run 5K coming up on June the 2nd. So if you're interested in doing it in person, that's great. The trails and property will be beautiful. If you'd rather do it virtually because you're not quite ready to come out yet, you can have a virtual option as well. So lots and lots and lots of great things coming up. So definitely come out and join us. Now I'm going to turn it over to Diane and let her take it away.
Thank you, Stacy. And thank you for joining us. This is one of my favorite times of year. It's just such a lovely time to be out in the woods looking for all of the marvelous plants that are coming into bloom. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. All right, so this is native wildflowers. So I guess we'll start with, what is a native plant or a native wildflower? And we have defined it as a species that has occurred in the area, for example, North America, Pennsylvania, prior to European settlement. So there's also some other designations. There's some naturalized things. But for native, it's those plants that were here prior to the arrival of the Europeans. This is a photo of Foxglove, which is a native plant. And this is Pink Hepatica. This is one of our spring wildflowers. And in the background, it looks like there are some Virginia bluebells as well. So gardening with these kinds of flowers really is beneficial to our native pollinators. It's also beneficial to you because they require less effort on our part. They've evolved to be comfortable in our environment, drought resistant, they don't require fertilizer, they don't require watering generally, so they're really easy to maintain once you get them established. So let's take a look at a few more. So here are some common occurring plants that we see in the wilds around. And the question really is, are these native wildflowers or are they not? So in this case, I was going to ask if you guys would like to play along and see if they're native or not. But I'll just go ahead and reveal the answers. So the ones that are outlined in red are not native. Number one is a plant that a lot of people think is native because you see it so often, but it is actually Dame's Rocket. A lot of people confuse it with Phlox, but Phlox has got 5 petals and Dame's Rocket only has 4. This is Dame's Rocket and it is not native. Number 2 is wild geranium. So I'm sure you're familiar with the domesticated geraniums, which have much bigger flower heads and are usually in red. This is the wild geranium, and this is a native. The third one is Queen Anne's lace, and we see this all over in the summertime. It is, however, not native to here. Number 4 is Virginia bluebells. These are native. Mine have bloomed and gone already, but these are really lovely. They grow in the shade, and they have this beautiful blue and purple tinge, and they really make a lovely display in the shady woodland. Number 5 is something that's called butter and eggs, and that is not a native. Number 6 is the Turks cap lily, and that is native. Number 7 is purple loosestrife. This is not a native, and it can be quite invasive. It lives in the water, in the wetlands, and it can really take over an area. It is not native, and it can be quite aggressive, like I said, and crowd out a lot of our other native wildflowers that like that same sort of habitat. So if you have this, it's best to try and uproot it and get rid of it. Number 8 is our daylilies, and those are not native. They're from Asia. And number 9 is the dwarf crested iris, and those are in fact native to here. All right, so we're going to kind of go a little bit in chronological order. This is skunk cabbage, and it is probably the first blooming wildflower. The flowers are really unique looking. They have a sort of oddly shaped cap. The flower is actually that small little round ball that's on the inside. I'm sure you've seen pictures or drawings or cartoons of the coronavirus. It kind of looks like that. It's a ball with a bunch of protruding little spikes, and that is the flower. It comes up first, and it is capable of generating its own heat, and it does have an aroma to it, if you will, that attracts its pollinators, which are flies. Once the flower is done blooming, it sends up its leaves, which are those really, really large green leaves that you see on the right. And they're also aromatic, if you will, if the leaves get bruised or cut. Next in order is the trout lily, also called dogtooth violet. It's called trout lily because if you look at the leaves, they have mottling to them, kind of green with a little mottling of violet or purple that is similar to what the side of a trout would look like. Excuse me. And it has this beautiful recurved yellow flower. These were blooming last week. I don't know if we'll be able to find any still in bloom, but we can certainly hope so. Beautiful yellow flower. This is Trillium. This is endangered in parts of the Northeast, particularly in New York. It is poisonous to us. However, birds and mammals like to eat the berries. This is one of the wildflowers that you do not want to pick because it can seriously damage the plant. The leafy colored bracts are not the flower. It's the flower is the sepals that are in the middle. And that's the only way that having those bracts is the only way that the plant can make fruit for its next season's bloom. So if you pick it, the plant will probably not survive. This next one is the mayapple. I know the kids like to call it the umbrella plant because when it first comes up out of the ground, it looks like a furled umbrella. It's very common in moist to dry woodlands, and it comes in 2 different forms. One has a single leaf coming up from the ground, and the other one has a double leaf. And you can see that on the left side of the left picture. And only when there are the 2 leaves will you get the flower. This pretty bloom on the right-hand side is thought to look like the blossom on an apple tree, hence the name mayapple. And it is also poisonous to us. However, the fruit, which is a small, round, green ball, I guess it could also be looked like it to an apple, can be edible if it's really perfectly ripe. It's not something I would recommend because trying to determine that whether it's perfectly ripe or not is a little bit tricky. And certainly if you're going to try it only in moderation because it can be quite upsetting to your stomach. The root is rumored or potentially being studied for some anti-cancer properties, and an extract of that has been used topically for skin cancer. But the root itself, in terms of edibility, is not. It is poisonous. Here's a familiar one that is blooming right now. This is Jack in the Pulpit. This again is most often found in moist areas, and again, it was not recommended to be edible. The flower and the leaves have a chemical in them called calcium oxalate, which causes a burning sensation to your lips and your tongue. Proper cooking can eliminate that, and the Native Americans in the area did use the root as a vegetable. Once this has finished blooming, the stalk generates a whole series of bright red berries that are really very attractive to birds and mammals as well. So you'll see them and then they'll be gone because they get eaten really quickly. Here's another spring ephemeral, a plant that blooms, quickly and then is gone. This is Bloodroot. This is again in the woods, and pollinated by small bees and flies. Deer will eat these, so they're a little bit tricky to maintain in our particular area because we have so many deer. I've tried to have them in my yard, and they haven't survived because the deer are quite ravenous about eating them in the early spring. Interestingly, the seeds of these are carried away by ants, and that is how it can be spread. This is a plant that you don't want to get necessarily in contact with your skin, because it can cause the tissue to become very irritated and sometimes even cause tissue death. So it has been used in previous, olden times as a treatment for skin cancer, because if you apply it carefully, you can knock out the cancerous cells. But again, it's not something you want. Don't try this at home. In some states in the Northeast, it is an endangered species. And interestingly, an extract has been approved by the FDA for use in toothpaste and in mouthwash for fighting plaque and gingivitis, which is an interesting use of a spring ephemeral plant. Okay, so here's the phlox. As you can see, it's got 5 petals. This is wild blue phlox. Very attractive to butterflies and hummingbirds. It's also extremely fragrant. So this one blooms best in sunny areas. So you will see this in the woods, but more often for a good bloom, you want to have it in at least a semi-sunny area. This is one of my favorites. This is the Spring Beauty, a very small plant, beautiful white petals with pink stripes, prefers dappled sunlight, pollinated again by bees. And interestingly, this grows from a small bulb type structure called a corm, which are edible. And it's also a favorite of moles and voles. We have it in quite abundance on the Audubon property, but interestingly, it's endangered in the next state over in New Jersey. So it's a favorite of mine, and we're lucky to have it. This is wild ginger. Hard to see the flowers on this one because it grows underneath the leaves that kind of spread out over it like a parasol, and it spreads by root runners. It's not related to the ginger that we eat, but Native Americans did use it for flavoring foods. It's also been used as a treatment for digestive orders, as the store-bought ginger can be. So when you have an upset stomach, you might want to have some ginger ale. This is used in a similar way. So it's treatment for digestive disorders. It doesn't grow very tall. The ones that I have in my yard are no more than 4 or 5 inches high. And this is pollinated by ground insects. So the flower is quite close to the ground, and it's pollinated by insects that crawl along the ground, ants and beetles. This is the violet wood sorrel. If you look, you can see it almost looks like has clover-shaped leaves. It is a species of special concern in Connecticut as well as New York. We do have it here. And this one is edible in all of its parts. You can make a poultice out of it for stopping bleeding, which is an interesting characteristic. So if you've been scratched up while you're collecting your berries and you find some of this, you can put the leaves as a poultice onto your scratches and it can stop the bleeding. Can also, the leaves can also be boiled and the decoction used as a lemonade once you sweeten it and cool it down. So you have sort of a lemony flavored drink without the lemons. Here are the Virginia bluebells. Light shade to part sun is where you want to grow these. These are pollinated by bees. They're very fragrant and they spread quite readily as long as you don't have a deer problem, because they will be eaten by deer. Here's another local favorite. This is the wild columbine. This one, there are a lot of not naturalized, but specialized versions of this that are sold in stores. And but this is the native one. It has the red petals with the yellowish tips. It grows in almost any condition except the deepest of shade. Again, this is a favorite of hummingbirds. Bumblebees will also pollinate it, and this one grows quite tall. This can be a foot to 1.5 feet, maybe even 2 feet tall. And infusions of this were used for everything by the Native Americans, from heart trouble to fever to a wash for poison ivy. The seeds are used for intertribal commerce, which is interesting, and when pulverized and rubbed on the skin as a love charm. So that's kind of an interesting way of using a plant. And it is in the same family as buttercups. Here we have the wild bleeding heart. This is not the domesticated one. This is the wild one. So again, you know, if you're going to be looking for these, you want to make sure that you're going to a native plant specialist, because without that, you might be not getting the native variety, but a more cultivated variety. These are very valuable to birds. The wild bleeding heart is endangered in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and is threatened in some of our neighboring states. But it's really a lovely plant. This next one is Dutchmans Britches. If you look at it, it looks like a pair of pantaloons, if you will, turned upside down. This is about 6 to 8 inches tall. It grows in dappled sun and rich woods, pollinated by bees, and seeds also are dispersed by ants. The foliage is toxic to mammals, so it's not something you want growing in your pasture land or any place like that, but it is lovely in the woods. Interestingly, the Native Americans did use this for syphilis, skin conditions, and as a blood purifier. So that's it's got quite a number of medicinal purposes, but again, you need to be very careful in taking care of any of these. Here's the dwarf crested iris. This also grows in dappled shade. It's very attractive to hummingbirds and bees as a nectar source. Not a particularly common plant, but a lovely one. This is blue false indigo. This is quite a tall plant. It can be 3 to 4 feet tall. It's very attractive to butterflies. It's, as you can tell from the structure of the flowers, it is a member of the pea family, and it can be used as a dye. It's also been used for toothaches and as a poultice for skin inflammations. So a number of uses for this particular plant. Here is a common milkweed, one of the plants that we encourage everyone to grow because it is the primary plant for monarch butterflies. It does best in full sun, and it is got a material in its sap that is quite toxic because it's got the glycosides in it. And this is the reason that birds will not eat monarch butterflies, because as the caterpillars eat the leaves, they ingest this compound and it becomes quite toxic to the birds. The flowers are visited by any number of pollinators, bees, wasps, not only monarch butterflies, but skippers. And it's quite a valuable plant. There are a number of different kinds of milkweeds. This is the common milkweed. And we'll see another one in the next slide. There's also a swamp milkweed, which is a deeper pink and likes to grow in moisture areas. This common milkweed can grow in quite dry areas. Again, the seed pods are interesting. They can be edible before they are fully formed with the seeds inside. If you parboil them for a few minutes 3 times and then cook them for 15 minutes. I don't recommend it. I've not tried it, but the silk is once the seeds are mature, the silk from them can be used in a number of different ways as well. This is the butterfly milkweed. This is a quite low growing plant, usually no more than a foot or so tall. Grows in full sun, likes sandy, acidic soil, so it grows really well in dry, open areas. This is one of the few milkweeds that does not have a milky sap, and it's been used in extracts from its roots for any number of things, for sore throats, lung ailments. Extracts from the roots have been studied to have activity against tuberculosis. And this particular plant is attractive to many species of butterflies, hummingbirds, and it's possibly been extirpated in Maine, and it is endangered in New Hampshire. It can be grown in the home garden, so I encourage folks to grow this because it is a wonderful pollinator plant. This is Rosemallow. This is one of the hibiscuses. It likes to be really by the water. It gets quite tall. It can be as high as 3 feet tall. It can grow in full sun. It can also only have average moisture, but it does prefer to be in a wetter area. Extracts of the flowers have been used for bladder infections. It's very attractive to butterflies and hummingbirds as well, with that deep-throated flower. It's quite an attractive plant. Also in this picture off to the right, you'll see some pokeweed, which is also very attractive to birds and to pollinators. This is Foamflower. This is one that I've had some success with in my garden. It spreads really well. It's a small plant, only about 6 inches, possibly at the most 12 inches tall. Spreads really well as a ground cover. It has a high tannin content, so it's quite astringent, and you can use an extract of that for eye wash or mouth sores. And a root tea was used by the Native Americans as treatment for diarrhea. Interestingly, this plant is endangered in New Jersey, but it grows quite well here, and it's one of the few plants that I've been able to manage to keep the deer from eating. So possibly because it has such a high tannin content, it's probably not too attractive to them. But it does grow very well on the north side of my house, which is practically full shade. It's one of the few flowering plants that you can get to make a nice display in really deep shade. This is Solomon seal. It has a lovely small yellowish to pale yellow to white flower. As you can see, it grows all along the stem on the left-hand side. Very attractive to hummingbirds. The berries that come from the flower are beloved by birds. Deer will eat the foliage. I've not had that particular problem, but they can eat it. And the root of this particular plant has been used for a lot of medicinal purposes, as a topical for treating cuts, curing toothaches. You can make a tea from it that has been useful in symptoms of menopause and indigestion. Supposedly, it is also useful in the treatment of diabetes, but I don't believe it has been studied scientifically for that. These are fire pinks. These are really interesting looking little plants. They get quite tall, about 2 feet. They prefer the sun, to part sun at the least. And these are the kinds of plants that will grow in very marginal soils. So if you have an area that's been disturbed by construction or other means of disturbing the soil, these will grow there and help restore the soil. The stem has got a sticky sap that prevents insects from stealing the nectar without pollinating the flower. So this is one of those defense mechanisms so that the flower can save its nectar for its pollinators, which are birds and hummingbirds and butterflies. This is the wild geranium. This is now probably getting into later on in the summer when this one is blooming. The nectar and the pollen from this plant is attractive to bees and flies, as well as very small butterflies, like skippers, for example. Chipmunks will eat the seeds of this. Deer will sometimes eat it, but it's not quite as attractive to them as some of the other plants. Like most geraniums, the stem and the leaves have an odor to them that is probably less than attractive. The mourning doves also like to eat the seeds of this, and the entire plant can be made into a tea that is useful for the treatment of sore throats. Now, this is a particularly interesting plant. I didn't know that we had cacti, that were native to Pennsylvania, but this is the eastern prickly pear. It blooms with this beautiful yellow flower, and like most cacti, will thrive in dry areas. The fruit is edible, and these can be propagated by transplanting some of the pads that are on the edge, the peripheral pads. You can pull them and transfer them into another area. The fruits can be eaten by turkeys. Skunks like them, rabbits like them, deer like them, coyotes even eat them, and it is the only native cactus in the Northeast. This is Penstemon, also known as beard tongue. These like sun. They prefer sandy soil, so you're not going to find this in a wetland area. The interesting thing is, if you look at the picture on the left-hand side, those lines are what are called nectar guidelines on that lower surface, and that is something that the insects can use kind of as a guide to find where the nectar is. It does have a medicinal use. The root has been used in the treatment of a toothache, but mostly it's just a very lovely flower. This one gets to be quite tall, can be up to 2 feet or so, and it blooms later on in the summer. We're talking, late July into August. This is Rudbeckia, also known as the black-eyed Susan, another fairly tall plant. Prefers the sun, but will do okay in part shade. Very forgiving in terms of the habitat where it will grow. It'll go anywhere from moist to dry. It's not a very long-lived perennial, but it will self-seed itself quite readily. So once you have it established, it will continue to come up, even though it's a very short-lived perennial, because it will seed itself and you'll be getting new plants all the time. The nectar is very attractive to bees and also to butterflies, and the seeds are a favorite of some of our finches. This is also a larval host plant for several butterfly species, and for those of us that have a problem with deer, this one is relatively deer resistant. Wild bergamot. The bergamots are also known as bee balm. You may have seen the bright red one, also known as bee balm. This one gets to be fairly tall, probably 2 feet or so. Prefers a more basic soil, more of a limey soil. It's in the mint family, and it's really one of the more attractive butterfly flowers that we have. It's been used for cooking. The nectar is very attractive to bees, to butterflies, to hummingbird moths, as well as hummingbirds itself. This particular plant also contains a natural antiseptic that is used in mouthwashes. This is called a compound called thymol. And here is the other bee balm, the other Monarda. This is the bright red one. This one will bloom in full sun. Likes the famous moist but well-drained soil, which is almost like an oxymoron to me. I've always had trouble finding moist but well-drained soil, and very attractive to butterflies and hummingbirds. Poultices can be made from the leaves of this particular plant for skin infections, and they can make a tea that is useful for gingivitis. And it tastes like a mixture of spearmint and peppermint with oregano. So it's got an interesting flavor to it when you make tea. Here is the foxglove. This is a good plant for semi-shady areas. It is a cardiac glycoside. Digoxin, which is a heart medication, has been extracted from this. This plant is poisonous to livestock, so it's another one of those plants you do not want growing in your pastures. This is not a perennial, it is a biennial. So the first year it'll just have leaves. The second year it will have the flowering stem, and then it will be done. So it only lasts a few years. This is blue-eyed grass. This is small. This is maybe 4 inches tall. And you'll see it growing in lots of fields. You have to be on the lookout for it. The flower is quite small, and it just comes up out of these grass-like stems. It likes sun primarily. It's in the same sort of family as irises. This one has also been used for diarrhea in children if you make a tea from the roots. You can also chew on the leaves for stomach aches. This blooms pretty much all summer long, starting late June through July and August. The flowers are, like I said, very small, and you have to be on the lookout for it. But they're lovely as you're walking across a green grassy field to see these bright blue flowers coming up out of the green, looking at you. This is one of the lobelias. This is the great lobelia. This is a beautiful blue stalk of many, many flowers. It is really, really attractive to hummingbirds. This particular lobelia really likes to be wet. It'll grow in swamps, in wet meadows, wet woods. It gets to be fairly tall. All parts of this plant are poisonous. It won't be toxic unless you really go overboard and ingest it in very large quantities, which certainly don't recommend. Really great hummingbird plant, as well as butterflies. This is Echinacea. This is Echinacea purpurea, the purple coneflower. It grows quite tall, up to 4 feet. Prefers to be in sunny locations. Really attractive to bees and butterflies. The seed heads that are left behind are a favorite of goldfinches and pretty much all of the finch family of birds. It's really an attractive plant to have in great masses. The color is lovely. Coneflowers come in a lot of different colors. There's one that blooms almost green. There are some yellow ones. All of these are native, just different species. This particular Echinacea is the one with the medicinal properties that boost your immune system. It has been, extracts of this have been used to shorten the durations of colds because of the immune boosting properties. And you can purchase extracts of this in most of the pharmacies and organic stores, if you don't want to make your own. And here's the goldenrod. Now we're getting into August. There are dozens and dozens of species of goldenrod. And I'm gonna give goldenrod a boost here. Goldenrod pollen is not the cause of your seasonal autumnal allergies. The pollen from goldenrod is much too heavy to be blown around on the wind. The plant that causes the autumnal allergies that people suffer with is ragweed, which blooms at about the same time, has a very, a very hardly noticeable green flower. But since it blooms at the same time as goldenrod, goldenrod gets all the blame for the seasonal allergies, but it's not goldenrod's fault. This is a truly important plant for migrating butterflies. It blooms well into the fall, really important as a source of pollen and nectar as butterflies try to fuel up for their migration routes. So it's really a very valuable plant to have for that purpose. This is New York Ironweed, also blooms late into the fall. A really tall plant. The ones in my yard get to be nearly 8 feet tall. Likes to have sun. It is one of the members of the aster family. The nectar is very attractive to butterflies. In this particular case, that's a sulfur that's on that flower. It has really, quite massive flower heads, as you see in the picture on the left. Beautiful, deep purple blooms. Here's the other lobelia. This is Lobelia Cardinalis. This is the cardinal flower. Prefers to be in the sun. Like Lobelia syphilitica that we saw before, the blue one, very attractive to hummingbirds, butterflies, and it is interesting because it does tend to bloom when the butterflies are starting their southward migration, as well as the hummingbird southward migration. So it does depend on hummingbirds for its pollination. So again, a good plant to support our pollinators and to support hummingbirds on their migration routes. Here's another really tall one. These are 2 different examples of Joe Pye weed. These guys can get up to about 6 feet tall. They like wet thickets, wet meadows, sun to partial shade. The name comes from an Indian healer from New England named by the name of Joe Pye. Very attractive to bees and butterflies. The seeds are eaten by mice, by wild turkeys, by ducks. This is also in the aster family. And if you need a tall plant for some late summer interest, this is a very good choice. And here is the Turks cap lily. This can be also quite tall, up to 5 or 6 feet. Again, prefers a slightly moist environment, wet meadows, but it does like the sun. The design of it with the recurved petals is designed to attract hummingbirds, sphinx moths, hummingbird moths, and other large butterflies. It is, however, also attractive to moles and voles, which like to eat the bulbs. Doesn't have any significant medicinal properties. The bulbs can be edible in soups, but personally, I'd rather it stayed in the ground and made these beautiful flowers for the butterflies. And here is one of the sunflowers. This is a Tickseed Sunflower. Blooms quite prolifically. It gets to be anywhere from 1 foot to 4 feet tall. Prefers full sun. It's also in the aster family. This one can get, even though it's native, this one can get a little aggressive, and you may have to do some control on it because it will tend to spread by self-seeding. It's a caterpillar food for a number of species of moths. The flowers are attractive to lots of different bees and butterflies. and the seeds are eaten by a number of different sparrows, purple finches, goldfinches. So it's really a useful plant for our pollinators and birds. It makes quite a lovely display of bright, bright yellow in the latter parts of the summer. And here's one of our asters. This is New England aster, anywhere from a bluish to a violet sort of color. Can also be quite tall. It will grow in part shade. Extremely attractive to bees and butterflies, and a nectar source for monarchs on their southward migration as well. It's a larval host for the checker spot and pearl crescent butterflies. Really a lovely plant to have. Blooms late in the summer into September or so. Here we have a number of different sunflowers. These are helianthus. The common sunflower on the right, they get to be really tall, up to 8 feet or so. Again, likes full sun. You can extract a nice yellow pigment from the flowers that you could use as a dye. You can also get a black or maybe a dullish blue from the seeds. Again, this is a good nectar plants for monarch on their southern migration. And the seeds, of course, are famously attractive to birds of all varieties. So sunflower seeds are really excellent for birds as they begin their southern migration as well. This has been used by Native Americans by making teas of the flowers for lung ailments, tea from the leaves for fever, and astringent poultice for snake and spider bites. So that's kind of an interesting item because all different parts of the flowers are used for different medicinal purposes. I put these in here even though they're not flowering because they're beautiful woodland plants. Ferns are non-flowering, they reproduce by spores. The one on the left is the cinnamon fern. Grows really in swampy areas. It likes muddy soil that's a little bit on the acidic side, prefers the shade. Interestingly, when these are first starting to come up out of the soil, the fiddleheads, if you will, are covered with a very fine fuzz that a lot of birds will pull from the plant to use in their nesting material. These can be eaten by deer, although I have lots of them in my yard and I have lots of deer and they don't seem to care to eat them in my yard at least. They're also make excellent cover for small creatures that like to live in the water like toads and some of the frogs. On the right hand side is the ostrich fern. And this is the one that people use as fiddlehead ferns for eating in the early spring. There are others that I suppose would be edible, but ostrich fern is the one that is most commonly sought after as the fiddlehead fern. You can saute in a little bit of butter and it's really delicious. We have hay-scented fern and maidenhair fern on this one. Just lovely, attractive green plants for filling in shady areas. No particular medicinal value or edible value, but just lovely plants. Here are some other interesting native plants. The Venus flytrap will grow in boggy areas, prefers to be quite wet, likes plants, likes areas that are really nitrogen poor or so. It's a small plant. It doesn't grow more than, maybe 6 inches high. One of a few carnivorous plants that we do have native here to Pennsylvania. That has these small hairs on the inside of those little traps. And once a fly or other creature contacts 2 of them simultaneously, the trap is sprung, and then the plant will secrete various enzymes and digest its prey. And this is the pitcher plant, the other carnivorous plant that we have. also prefers boggy areas, can be 6 inches to a foot or so. The pitcher will collect water, and the insects, will crawl down in there to try and get a drink, maybe of the water, maybe of the nectar. But the hairs on the inside of the pitcher are pointing downward, and the insect cannot climb back out. So they are stuck inside the little pitcher, and the plant then secretes its enzymes and goes on to digest its prey. And the last one we have is also a carnivorous plant. These are the sundews. Again, these are plants of bogs and swamps. They secrete a very sweet, sticky sort of substance that attracts their prey, but is so sticky that once an insect gets involved with that sweet, sticky stuff, it cannot escape. And then it is trapped. And once again, the plant digests its prey and goes on, carrying on, and it's on its merry way. And that, I believe, is my last one. Yes, it is. Okay. All right. So a good assortment of native wildflowers that we can enjoy in the Pennsylvania woods. We do not have any of the carnivorous plants that I've ever found here at Honey Hollow, but we do have most of the other ones. And hopefully if you come on Saturday, we'll get to see some of them. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. You can unmute or put them in the chat. And there we are.
When is it on Saturday?
2 o'clock.
And you have to sign up in advance?
Yes.
Is it going to be led or we just walk around?
No, I'm leading.
Okay.
You can never be sure what we'll find, but I'll happily lead us on the trails.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you for coming, and I hope that we'll see you on Saturday.
I have one last question.
Yes.
Where's the best place to buy native plants if you want to do a little triangle in your backyard or something?
Well, there's
or
a number
front yard or something.
Yeah, there's a number of places around. Bowman's Hill Wildflower Preserve has got a number of some of the wildflowers. If you want ones that are a little bit larger, they usually have small plugs and seedlings. If you want some that are a little bit bigger, I recommend Gino's in Wrightstown. It's I'm trying to remember what road it's on. I think it's on 232.
Okay. Is it
But-
G-E-N-N-O?
Gino.
G-I-N-O. Okay.
Yeah, they have wonderful plant material. That's where we get a lot of our plant materials.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's very native too. I actually just was there last week, and we planted a whole bunch today with some volunteers, and we planted Jackman pulpits. We planted some Dutchmans Britches. I forget all we did, but I mean, we probably got like 10 different kinds of native ephemeral wildflowers. So they've got a really nice selection.
And they're bigger than the ones that you can get at Bowman's. I mean, they're much sturdier.
Okay.
More likely to survive in my experience.
I'll go there. Thank you. I need all the help I can get.
All right. So if you and they're also really knowledgeable on how to plant and where to plant. So if you go there, with the description of where you want to put these plants, they'll be able to recommend things that are most likely to do well in your particular habitat.
Thank you.
All right. So hopefully we'll see you Saturday. And if
Okay.
not, enjoy your plants.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right,
Thanks
bye.
very much.
Thank you.
Everyone have a
Very
good
nice.
evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.